I got 1 million damage! 2 million! Her ending freeze frame always looks really sick too. Hello citizens, welcome back to my Jane Doe first impressions video. As our first 5-star limited anomaly character, Jane feels extremely powerful and fun to play. No disorder necessary to play a powerful Jane team. She also brings a very different playstyle compared to our current attacker and stunner teams, and it's quite refreshing. She does have some shortcomings, which I will go over later, but all things considered, I feel like Jane is an S-tier agent and can definitely be stronger than both Zhuyuan and Ellen, depending on the enemies. Her team building feels fairly flexible as well, and you definitely don't need multiple anomaly characters. Here's why. Oh, a quick disclaimer. Footage in this video comes from the creator experience server, and it's possible there are changes on release. However, I will update in the comments if anything changes. So Jane is an on-field anomaly DPS that mainly deals damage via her assault procs. Jane's gameplay can be really simple, and I think that's one beauty of the physical attribute anomaly teams. You don't have to rely on multiple attributes or disorder, even though you definitely can, but you're not really losing out because physical anomaly damage is front-loaded. All of Jane's attacks inflict physical anomaly on the enemy, which can be tracked by the circle indicator here. Once the circle fills to full, it will trigger the respective anomaly effect. In the case of physical attribute, it triggers Assault, which deals one big instance of physical damage. And even though anomaly damage does not normally crit, Jane's core passive gives Assault a fixed 50% crit damage with up to 100% crit rate, as long as you have enough anomaly proficiency. Jane's main source of damage comes from these assault procs. The base assault coefficient is huge, and a level 60 Jane can easily deal 300k to 500k per assault proc. And when the enemy is stunned, you can deal over 1 million per assault. On average, Jane needs around 1 combo to proc assault versus normal enemies, 2 to 3 combos versus elites, and 5 or more versus bosses. Most of us already got to play Jane via the story quest, so instead of diving into her kit, I will dive into her teams and who I feel she is the strongest with, since a lot of people had questions around her team building. After extensive testing, my favorite Jane team is probably Jane, Seth, and Rena or another support, followed by Jane, Grace, and Rena or Seth. Seth was surprisingly comfy to play despite how clunky he felt with his slower attacks initially. Seth activates Jane's additional ability, reduces enemy anomaly build-up res, and grants a shield that can give Jane up to 100 anomaly proficiency, which is around a 20 to 25% damage increase with near 100% uptime. Also, one really nice part is that he works well at M0, even though his M1 is pretty nice. With Jane and Seth, you can on-field Jane and take out Seth to defensive assist once in a while, and after the assist follow-up, which procs his quick assist, you can immediately swap back onto Jane with his shield buff active. It's really nice and comfy. The shield buff can last up to 25 seconds or 35 with his M1. The Jane and Grace team was pretty fun too, letting you trigger back-to-back-to-back disorders, and works well with both Rena or Seth as the third. Rena feels slightly stronger since she buffs both anomaly characters and further enhances Grace's shock. However, Seth brings more days to the team with his defensive assists, his anomaly build-up res works for both attributes, and even though his buff is single target, it lasts longer. You can pretty much go with whoever you have or want to build here. I played both of these two teams a lot, as I was most interested in seeing how the single anomaly focused team compared to the double anomaly focused team. Surprisingly, they're actually very similar, and I kind of prefer the single anomaly focused team. I honestly think you can play both and have great results depending on who you like better. For those that don't want to invest in Grace or don't have a Grace, you're not really losing out. Even though the Grace team feels like it might have a higher ceiling with the potential disorder procs, the assault focus team is actually very strong by itself, since with more on-field time, Jane can build and proc a lot more assaults. Also, if you have Rena, with Seth and Rena on the team, you'll end up triggering random shocks here and there, so you still benefit from free disorder procs. On the Grace team, what can end up happening in combat is, you spend a lot of time optimizing for all the disorder timings and waiting for the right attribute anomaly to proc first. But in the process, you end up losing damage because Jane could have just been attacking and proccing more assaults. Also, since there are a lot more swaps involved in this team, and you need to pay a lot more attention to the build-up bar, it's a lot easier to swap onto the wrong character because sometimes the character you're trying to swap back into is still on field because they haven't finished their attack yet, and in general, it felt a bit messier to play. On the other hand, the Jane, Seth plus support team is a lot more straightforward and lets you fully embrace the fun of ice skating without having to worry about too much else. But at the same time, for those who are interested, there are definitely optimizations you can look into to further increase your team damage, so it makes things kind of fun too. For those who like Neko, Jane, Neko, and Seth can work well. Neko synergizes well with Jane's assault procs, and you can think of her as a burst DPS. She's useful to take out versus enemies that have a bit of HP left after Jane's assaults, or versus enemies that cannot be attribute anomalied. For those who don't have Neko, or if you have Neko but are not interested in building her, I don't think she is a priority and definitely not needed. As for Piper, after trying various Piper and Jane teams, I don't really recommend playing them together, because what I realized was that Jane is so strong by herself on field that taking Piper out to spin is almost always a DPS loss, since Piper's EX unfortunately takes too much time. Previously, there were some situations where Piper was nice to take out to spin down a group of enemies, but Jane actually has decent grouping since her normal attacks can push enemies, so she can generally take care of them quicker by herself. The only reason I can see using Piper is if you don't have or don't like playing Grace and Seth, and want Piper to help activate Jane's additional ability so you can bring a flex third. So Jane sounds pretty OP, right? Is there a catch? Despite how strong and fun she can be, Jane does have a few glaring weaknesses. Because most of her damage is tied to Anomaly, versus enemies that cannot be afflicted with Anomaly, such as these annoying towers or these tentacles in the hollow, she will struggle quite a bit compared to our attackers. Similarly, sometimes enemies will have just a little bit of HP left, but you will need to use 2 to 3 more combos with Jane in order to trigger another assault before you deal enough damage to kill them. This is where Neko might help on the Jane teams, since Neko deals decent damage. Jane also relies heavily on dodge counters, both to extend her passion state and to accelerate her basic combos to inflict more attribute anomaly. Therefore, she is considerably weaker to elites and bosses that do not attack as often. Versus the passive enemies, it will definitely be quicker with your attackers and stunners. Overall, is Jane worth it? Compared to the first 2 limited attacker DPSs like Ellen and Julian, Jane feels equally strong, but in a different type of environment. She is a powerful character with flexible teams that is fun to play and has multiple playstyles. She is especially strong when the enemies are aggressive, such as in Shiyu 8. I personally really like her and recommend her for most accounts, especially if you don't have 2 main DPSs already. Jane can also help you become familiar with Anomaly teams if you haven't tried it previously, and because she doesn't rely on disorder, you're free to play with or without. In the future, when Burnus and Caesar releases, you might be able to play them all on the same team as well. If you want to pre-farm for Jane, remember that Anomaly buildup does not scale with skill levels, so you should prioritize them after her level, drive discs, and W engine. Jane definitely wants to be level 60 since there is even a level coefficient in the Anomaly damage calculation, on top of it being in the enemy defense calculation. In terms of disc drives, here is what I recommend. For Drive Disc 5, you can go with either pen percent or a physical damage bonus, depending on which one rolls more attack percent and anomaly proficiency. For Drive Disc 6, I've been preferring attack percent over anomaly mastery, especially if you're planning to go for her W engine. Here's a chart comparing the W engines in terms of their damage. However, one important thing to point out is that on top of the extra damage, Jane's W engine also gives her 40% extra anomaly buildup rate. Quicker anomaly buildup equals more assault procs. Jane's W engine is quite good, and if you factor in the extra Anomaly build-up rate, the weapon comparison probably looks closer to something like this. Via testing and combat, this feels pretty accurate. In terms of her Mindscapes, her M1 is decent, but her M2 is really good. And if you have the means, M2R1 is what I would go for to make her more future-proof. Thank you for watching. I mostly wanted to summarize my thoughts on Jane's strengths, weaknesses, and how she felt on various teams. If I have time, I'll release another video with some tips and tricks for how to play her, as well as go a bit more in depth on how the Anomaly interactions work. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and see you on stream or in my next video.